Hello everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good whenever you're watching this video. Welcome to our favorite yearly tradition. It is the Krista Fields Games I've Played During the Year tier list. I say that partly in jest, but I think this might actually be my new favorite New Year's tradition at this point. For the past couple of years, I've been going, oh man, January's coming up, time for a new tier list, baby. So here we are once again. As always, this is not a list of games that released during 2023. This is just a list of games that I happened to play during 2023. That includes both new and old games. Although the scope is going to be slightly more narrow this year because this list is only going to include games that I only played for the first time. So any repeat playthrough games, games that my opinions are already well documented, games where I might talk about them again in the future coming up real soon, I decided not to include on the list. But anything new that I played this year, that I still have videos that I'm going to talk about them soon. And say hello to the dogs. The dogs say hello back to you. I'm not really going to cut around them unless I absolutely need to. Not everyone's home right now, so we might get some barkers later. And as for a little organizational thing this year, you may notice that the games that are bottom of the list are all in alphabetical order, aside from a few little minor adjustments here and there. This is because usually whenever I do these, I always write down the games I finish in a year as I'm finishing them. So if I finish some games in January, I write down the games I finished in January, then February, the games I finished in February, so on, so on, so on. This year, I did not do that for personal reasons, so I didn't write down any of the games I finished during the year as they came up. So I had to actually recompile this list based off of partly memory, partly just cross-referencing what I played back in the, whenever Steam and Nintendo and Sony does those, yearly end of the year, here's what you played, here's your statistic lists. So this is a combination of those sources, plus of whatever else I can remember playing. So this might not be a list that's entirely 100% accurate. I might have forgotten something here and there, but I think we're mostly in the clear. I think this is pretty much everything I've played this year. So we have 6 tiers to go over today. At the top is obviously our GOATY. At the end of the night, there will be 2 games in this, the best game I played last year and the best game I played last year that did not come out last year. So that's where those will be going. And then S, A, B, C, you get the rest of that gist. I also included one last tier. Instead of the D tier, we have the didn't finish tier. And that is for the games where I feel like I've played a significant amount of, or at least enough to comment on, but did not finish or did not play as substantially as I would have liked to. I think that'll be nice because we're not punishing the games that I just didn't happen to finish. Sometimes you just don't have the time to finish everything you'd like to. So that is where the didn't finish tier will be going. So we'll be able to comment on them, but understand that those are probably not completely solidified opinions and that wherever I place them on the tier list, they could have realistically changed. So I think that's a better reflection on being able to talk about them, but not being able to definitively say any specific place they'd go. So should we get into it right away? I think we should, because every year I get worse and worse about keeping these shorter than the last. So let's start out with the first game on the list, Astro's Playroom. So at the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023, I bought myself a PlayStation 5. I bought myself a PlayStation 5 to play one of the other games that may be on this list. But that wasn't the only reason by itself, partly because the PlayStation 5 is old enough at this point to have accrued some exclusives that I want to try out at this point. So I feel it is, at this point, worth the purchase of a PS5, so I say, let's go get myself a PlayStation 5, and the first game I played on my PlayStation 5 is the game that comes with every PlayStation 5. It's Astro's Playroom. And for those who do not know, Astrobot Rescue Mission is one of my favorite games on the PlayStation 4. Accounting for games that are still only exclusive to the PlayStation 4, Astrobot Rescue Mission is my favorite game. It was a game that was so good that I partly wish that it wasn't a VR game, just so that more people could have the chance to play it. Now, I don't feel too bad about that anymore. You can play Kirby and the Forgotten Land. You'll get a very similar experience. But Astrobot's Rescue Mission was fantastic. And guess what? Astro's Playroom was also fantastic. This might sound a little weird because it's only an A tier, but I'd say that, you know, despite this being only a 3-hour game, this might still be my favorite game on the PlayStation 5. So it's not much more complicated than what it seems on the outside. And a lot of people, when the game was first announced, when the PlayStation 5 was first announced, they said, oh, Astro's Playroom, it's a game that's a little tech demo, a little pack-in game. Oh, okay. Just a cute little pack-in game, right? We don't need to worry about that. And that devastated me. That devastated me as someone who was a fan of Astrobot Rescue Mission because I knew exactly what we were getting with Playroom, and I knew it was going to be gold, and it made me sad to see people write it off. And I mean, I think to a certain extent, a lot of people still kind of write it off. It's like, just a little game that came with, and it's like, no, dude. No, dude, this game's sick. I want Team Azobi to get some budget. I want them to get some budget because they deserve it. I want to see a full-blown, absolute, from the ground up, $70 Astrobot 3D platforming game because this team has the chops for it. So this is a very, literal tour of the PlayStation 5, both inside and out. And it shows you, all the different features that both the PlayStation controller, the DualSense controller in this case, and the console itself will be able to do in the future. So it takes you through differently themed levels, like the GPU and the SSD and the motherboard or the processor and all of that. And it's a charming little game. It is absolutely fun and hilarious. And very revering of PlayStation's history. You get to collect a whole bunch of little accessories for the PlayStation consoles over the years, and they all culminate in getting the big consoles. You can play around with all of them. And it's great. It's absolutely charming. If you have a PlayStation 5, don't skip on this game. Please play it. Anyway, let's move on. So, there's been a little kind of joke over the past few years that Chris the Fields has a little tradition where he plays every single game in a game franchise this time. That did not quite happen this year. However, the closest we've come is this next block of 4 games. I decided to play through the original Dragon Quests 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the NES. So I guess to be even more specific, I played through Dragon Warrior 1, Dragon Warrior 2, Dragon Warrior 3, Dragon Warrior 4. And I've played a little bit of 1 before, I've played a little bit of 3 before, but for the most part, I played all 4 of these games for the first time on their NES revisions. Not even their remakes or anything. These are the NES games I'm talking about here. If you're curious as to why, it's just because I value the history. I value being able to play a game where I get to see where the RPG genre that I know and love so much came from. And that is what makes Dragon Quest in particular so special. It is the biggest RPG series in Japan. And a lot of that comes from historical value of them simplifying the RPG for a new audience, for a new console, a console that did not have an entire keyboard to rely on, that only had 8 kilobytes of memory to pull from. And it introduced a very simple RPG premise to a new audience, and then it continued to build on that. So let's start with Dragon Quest 1. Dragon Quest 1. They don't make them like this anymore. And I mean that. They don't make games like this anymore. If let's just say, hypothetically speaking, an up-and-coming indie game developer, a guy who's working on making games, likes RPGs, wants to make an RPG of his own, if that person were to say, I'm gonna make an RPG and it's gonna be inspired by Dragon Quest 1 specifically, he'd either be laughed out of the room, or people would be like, oh, that's cute, that's a good first RPG to make, let us know when you make a game that has, multiple playable characters, multiple party members, multiple storylines, multiple world maps, and all these other features that RPGs have become now famous and known for. And in a way, hypothetically speaking, I think Dragon Quest 1 might be, in a way, my favorite game in the series. Now, on an execution level, I would not say that's the case. However, I think that NES RPGs are a little bit too easily dismissed in the modern era of video games, because I think that they have a lot of great ideas going for them. I think that these games, because they didn't have stories to rely on, at least not like the stories that we know now, because they didn't have all these characters to rely on, because they didn't have all these other elements backing them up, they had to rely on players wanting to play the game, and that was their main gameplay hook. They wanted to have players explore this world. And that's the neat thing about Dragon Quest I, is you get 8 sentences of introduction, the king gives you your mission, you're given some slight tutorialization on like how exploration works, so that you know going forward, and beyond that, you can go to any point of the game, any part of the world map, any point in the game that you want to, provided you can survive the journey, of course. Dragon Quest I does not tell you how to live your life. It encourages you to actually seek out townspeople, to get their information, to get what clues they have, and then using those, and then using the tools that you can procure from them, go out into the world and discover the rest of it for yourself. I think a lot more games could stand to learn from what Dragon Quest I did, and we've traded its strengths for other strengths, arguably, but I think there's something to be missed in this old game. Now, from an execution level, I've said this before, previously that is, that Dragon Quest I, hypothetically my favorite, but execution not so much. Because the unfortunate thing about NES RPGs is that there comes to be a point where you have to grind. And I do not like grinding in RPG. Okay, well, I should be careful about saying that. I like grinding in RPGs. I do not like being forced to grind in RPGs, where there is no answer beyond battling monsters over and over again to get stronger, to get to more areas of the game. So there was a point in the game where I felt like I explored everything in an area, or everywhere in an area I needed to, and I crossed a bridge, I went along, and the monsters were just a little bit too tough for me to deal with in that area. So I said, okay, you know what, that's fair. That's how the game's built, that's the game designed, so I'll just go to another area and then explore around there. So that's exactly what I do. And then I find even stronger monsters that wipe me out even faster. That's not good. That's not good. And that is a somewhat common occurrence in Dragon Quest I. Debatably, that's even like as far as like the first 10 minutes of the game, you have to just start grinding because you're going to fight a lot of monsters who are going to take away your meager health pool very fast. So you have to grind from the very beginning, have to consistently grind throughout. And to be clear, I wasn't running from battles all the time, I wasn't skipping random encounters. I was just playing the game as I normally would. I was underleveled. And there's like some kind of like weirdly kind of gratifying things about its progression system. Like once you get strong enough, like enemy monsters start running away from you, and that feels kind of good. Almost a little bit of a waste of time because like it loads in the battle and then the monster just runs away right away. But I mean, you ran away right away too when you saw some other monsters before, right? So it's kind of a nice little way to show that you've become more than what these monsters are capable of. But that's really the biggest problems I have with Dragon Quest I, is that it's a fun game, it's just grindy. Like, this game isn't that cryptic at all. I wanted to do something with the NES Dragon Quest games. I wanted to see if NES RPGs are truly so cryptic, truly so obtuse in their progression, that you need to look up a guide in order to figure out what to do. Because that is a common complaint I have heard many times over the years. Like, oh, these games haven't aged very well because you just have to look up what you're supposed to do because the game doesn't tell you. Like, I already talked about how there are NPCs in this game that give you those hints that let you know where you're supposed to be going, or at least clues and ideas of what to do. But I wanted to see, like, okay, can I beat this game by myself without any external efforts? And to be honest, there was one instance I needed a guide, I needed to look up. So there's a specific item tucked away in a specific corner of the map, which I did not think to go to that corner, but there is an item that you need in order to fight the final boss in that very specific corner. and I never thought to look there, and I was a little bit annoyed by that, because I spent a lot of time walking around, wandering around, trying to figure it out, and then I couldn't figure it out. I think one of the NPCs does kind of give a somewhat misleading hint for that, but whatever. Okay, so one kind of obtuse thing. Oh well, whatever. But other than that, Dragon Quest I is a pretty good game. I would still recommend, unless you are like me and you care about the history and you're interested to see where Dragon Quest came from as a series, unless you are a crazy idiot like me, I would recommend playing the remakes over this. Dragon Quest I on the NES took me roughly maybe about 20-ish, maybe a little bit less than that, but 20-ish hours to beat. The later releases of Dragon Quest I fine-tuned the difficulty balancing and like how much experience monsters drop after being defeated and whatever. It takes a 20-hour RPG, cuts it down to around 5 hours. So this is a very fascinating, like, little piece of gaming history that I would honestly recommend. Now, despite being the first game in the series, I would say that it's actually Dragon Quest II, where the series becomes a lot more similar to the games that came afterward. So Dragon Quest II is everything Dragon Quest I is, but bigger. It has a bigger cast of characters. You get a warrior, you get a black mage, and you get a white mage. Or I guess, to be more in line with Dragon Quest naming conventions, you get a warrior, you get a wizard, and you get a cleric. And if you look at a lot of older RPGs, like that is the most like basic baseline concept of what a party can be, and it all started here. Dragon Quest II has a more involved story than Dragon Quest I. In the very first moments of this game, you get an opening cutscene that's at least like somewhat choreographed and has a lot of moving actors going about, and it's more than just a king granting you your mission. And you're told about how Hargon is this super evil guy, and you get to see the consequences of like the things he does. So you get shown and told, and that's very effective. Like Hargon is a guy I wanted to put down as soon as possible because the game built him up to be a threat very early on. Dragon Quest II is literally bigger than Dragon Quest I. You could walk from one end of the overworld in Dragon Quest I to the other end in about like 5 minutes. In Dragon Quest II, it takes 5 minutes just to get off the first continent. Well, I mean, there's more questing to do on the first continent. But that's also kind of another, like, easing into the progression of Dragon Quest II. You start off only by yourself, and you're on your first continent, and you have to go around, do a little bit of questing, and then you'll get your first party member, the wizard, and that feels great. You're more powerful now than you were before. So then you move on to the second continent, you have to do a little bit more questing, that'll eventually lead to getting the third party member, the cleric, and you're even stronger now than before, and the world map overture changes at this point to a much more happy and jolly tune, and it's great. It's a great song. It's maybe even my favorite song of the NES Dragon Quest games, honestly. So you do a little bit more questing, you go to the third continent, have to do a little bit of exploration and be a little bit more involved and have to backtrack a little bit to the second continent to figure out what you're supposed to do in order to progress. Then you get to the fourth continent, you do a little bit more questing there, you get your boat, and then the game you're actually supposed to be playing officially begins. You are now actually thrown out into the world and you have to figure out what to do for yourself. So if you are smart, you'll sail a little bit to the east. You'll find Alefgard, the world of the first Dragon Quest game. And then you'll explore around there. You'll go to the Dragon Lord's old castle, and then you find the descendant of the Dragon Lord. And he's like, hey, that Hargon guy, I hate him. Here's how you beat him. You gotta find these 5 items to reach his domain. So that is your mission. You are to travel across the entire world in search of these 5 items. Where else are they beyond that? Figure that out for yourself. Explore, go around, do that. And I really appreciate that, but the scale I think is a bit too big in Dragon Quest II. Dragon Quest too big, how about that? The scale is a bit too big, and it's very easy to get lost, and it's very easy to kind of be a little bit demotivated in exploring, because although you have a return spell, Just like in Dragon Quest 1, it returns you back to your last save point. And in Dragon Quest 1, that was the only save point in the game. And the world didn't take that much effort and time to cross anyway, so it wasn't a huge deal. In Dragon Quest 2, the world takes a lot more time to traverse across. So you have to spend a lot of time traveling back to places you might not have been completely finished with yet. And beyond that, it also takes a lot of effort to even just to figure out where you can go in the first place, what island, what landmasses you haven't been to, have you been here, who knows. Dragon Quest II's world design is very convoluted. I honestly don't like it very much at all. So, like before, I wanted to know, is it possible to beat Dragon Quest II like Dragon Quest I without a guide, without maps, without any external assistance? And to be honest, I don't think so. I think this is a game you absolutely should have external help to guide you through. At least enough help to like, if you're exploring around and you don't know where to do, at least just looking up a map to try and figure out where you haven't been to yet, that's usually enough. But like, there was one island in the game. There's a tiny little island that you need to go to in order to get a key you need for progression. And it's a very small island, and it's in a corner of the map, and it's very unlikely you're going to see it unless you just happen to go by that space. And it's not even like that big of an island, so it's not like it can catch your attention a little bit easier and be a little bit easier to find. It's only like 3 tiles wide, so you have to really be on the lookout for it. And it's like it could be anywhere in this massive world. Who knows where it is? But beyond all that, Dragon Quest II is also arguably the most difficult game in the series. In fact, I wouldn't even say arguably, I say that it is the most difficult game, at least from what I've played, but I don't think it could get much harder than this. So, it's a little bit challenging at the beginning, but nothing too bad, nothing too unmanageable. Once you get the boat, the difficulty kind of spikes up because you could theoretically go anywhere. Some monsters could be however many levels above you, and you have no idea. But after a while, the challenge dramatically lowers. Might spike up again for a dungeon, but again, it's not too bad. But when you get to the final area, things get ridiculous. There's a lot of really strong enemies, and a lot of those really strong enemies have spells that can just kill your character. And it's like, okay, well, I don't like it, but that's fine. Because we'll just do what we do whenever we get an RPG like this and just grind until we match the recommended level. Well, guess what? I want to highlight this in particular. There is a certain enemy type in the Dragon Quest games called the Metal Slime. And the Metal Slime, the gimmick with this particular enemy type is they are extremely evasive, but they have really low HP. And if you can lower their HP down to 0, you get massive experience boosts. Dragon Quest II is no different. In fact, in one of the final areas of the game, there are even metal slime enemies that you can also partake in, and they're not like the most common enemy types in the game, but they appear often enough that you'll want to go after them. Metal slimes in this game have more HP than they do in other games in the series. Like, they can have up to 8 HP, and you'll only ever do 1 damage at a time unless you get a critical hit, which is like a 1 in 128 chance or something like that. So if you are lucky enough to kill even just 1 metal slime, they will drop 1,000 experience points. At this point in the game, you need upwards of 10,000 experience points to go up 1 level. It eventually got to a point where I just said screw it, and I turned on cheats that allowed me to get invincibility, and I just bypassed the challenge of the game at that point, and I did not feel bad about it at all, because the challenge at that point in the game is far too ridiculous. It turned me off of Dragon Quest II. It soured me on the whole thing. C tier. But now we come to Dragon Quest III. So Dragon Quest I was the foundation. Dragon Quest II was the improvement, but also the flawed execution of the adventuring idea. But Dragon Quest III is a culmination of the genre. Self-admittedly by the developers' own opinions, they felt as if they perfected Dragon Quest with this game. And to be honest, It's not hard to see why. Dragon Quest III is everything Dragon Quest II is, but more. So what makes Dragon Quest III truly so special? Okay, so Dragon Quest II had multiple party members, right? Each one had their own role, but they were fixed. They were all fixed. They had their own role, and that's what they needed to stick to. In Dragon Quest III, in addition to your hero, you can get 3 other party members in your active party at the same time, that is. These characters, you can name them whatever you want. You can make them whatever class you want. You want to roll with a warrior, a wizard, and a cleric again, in addition to your hero? Absolutely. You want to roll with all warriors? You want to roll with all clerics? You want to roll with jesters? Any combination that you can think of that's available to you, you can get that right at the beginning of the game. You can choose to load up all 4 characters, or you can choose to only take 2 or 3 to get a little bit more experience gains from less divided experience after battles. And then you can go back for another character if you want, or you can just roll with those 3 or whatever. You have the freedom. And on the subject of classes, when you get about a third of the way into the game, you meet a guy who can change any of your character's classes after they reach level 20. You want to make your warrior a cleric so that they have high strength and can now use white magic. There's a lot of customization you can do when changing classes, and it makes doing that very fun. This might be the first video game that I know of to have multiclassing, and I love multiclassing. I love job systems, and this is great. Before Final Fantasy III, by the way, the world design is better because although this game asks you this time to get 6 items you need in order to defeat the final boss, the game makes it clear, okay, you know where to go. Go find those 6 things. Guess what? There isn't an in-game map in these games. There would have been with the instruction manuals, but there's not an in-game map, so that can be somewhat inconvenient. But if you notice the pattern for how the world is laid out, you'll notice, hey, this continent looks kind of like Africa. And hey, the continent above it kind of looks like Europe. And the continent to the east of it kind of looks like Asia. Oh, and if we go south, that kind of looks like Australia. That's right. The world map in Dragon Quest III is shaped like our own world map. If you passed the 2nd grade, you already have a mental world map in your mind of the entire space this game takes place in. Oh, but you want to know how else world design is better? Your return spell. The spell that warps you back to your previous save point? Nope, not anymore. It warps you back to whatever town you visited before that you want to, regardless of whether or not there's a save point there. That makes traversal a lot more convenient, and it makes gathering around clues for where you need to go a lot easier. This is a game I actually did not need a guide once to finish it. I didn't need to use the guide at all. I had a few close calls, admittedly, and there was one item I did look up the location to, but it wouldn't have changed me being able to beat the game or not. The game gives you all the clues you need from all the NPCs and everything that you need to know, and it's great. So once you beat the final boss, excellent, great. You, just like the other Dragon Quest games, you go back to your hometown, and guess what? Another genre convention that's become so cliched that we take it for granted, but got started here. The final boss that you faced is only the Disc 1 villain. There's an entirely new act to the game. You go to a brand new world map. This game became twice as big as you thought it was. Well, probably only like 30% bigger, but even still, the point you think the game's done, it's only just begun all over again. So it's honestly no surprise why Dragon Quest III has become as famous as it is. Dragon Quest III is a legendary game where if you're a fan of JRPGs, this is truly one that I recommend you play. Dragon Quest 1 and 2 are kind of like soft recommendations for like, if you're curious to see how JRPGs started, like go check those games out. But Dragon Quest 3, not only is it a legendary game that established a lot of genre conventions that we also take for granted now, but it's also still really fun. Look forward to that remake when it comes out because it's going to be a great time. you know what? Make it our first S tier of the list. And now we come to Dragon Quest IV. Like I said previously, Dragon Quest III was, by admittance of the developers, the perfection of that series, of that formula. They knew that they could not do better than this, and in a way they were right. Dragon Quest III sold like bonkers when it came out. The Japanese economy was put into a minor crisis because people were skipping work and school just to play that game on release day. So how do you do better with Dragon Quest IV? Well, they decided they couldn't do better. They decided to take a different approach this time. What they did instead was to put more emphasis on the storytelling and the characters. So while Dragon Quest III was a lot more freeform in terms of like building your party however you wanted, Dragon Quest IV restricted that once again. So it kind of took some cues from Dragon Quest II in the sense of you get a chapter where you get a character, and then you explore that character, you explore a small chunk of the overworld with them, and once that chapter is done, you transition into a new chapter where you play as an entirely new party with new commands and new all that, and explore the world all over again, set up more of the story. When that's done, transition to a new character, get a new style this time. You get, in the third chapter, you get Torneko Taloon, dude. And he's a merchant. He does a merchant thing. He just goes around the world buying and selling. And it's wholesome and it's great. And after his chapter's done, you play a little bit more of the game, you get another chapter, and then after all those initial prologue chapters are done, you get the final chapter where you finally play as your named protagonist after like 15 or so hours into the game. Dragon Quest IV is not only the last NES RPG, I would also argue that it's, in a way, the first SNES RPG. It's really ambitious. It does something that I didn't think that NES games had the capability, the ambition to fully realize. And that's why I loved playing the original versions of these games. Like, Dragon Quest IV feels so ahead of its time that if you were to hypothetically play its remakes, it wouldn't feel that much different from a game you could play right now. So Dragon Quest IV is about equal to Dragon Quest III. Honestly, whether I prefer 4 or 3 kind of depends on how I'm feeling at the time. But 4 does have certain advantages over 3 does. For one, there's no grinding in this game. You heard me right, this NES RPG, no grinding. You don't have to grind at all. The game adequately matches the challenge level of the monsters with where your player level is at. And it's great. It's fantastic. And although it isn't as legendary as Dragon Quest III, although it's not quite as subversive, I'd say, it does manage to kind of recapture some of those same feelings. If you've made it through the game, you probably know what I'm talking about. The one thing that is kind of odd about the NES version, as opposed to some of the other versions of the game, this game has AI-controlled party members, but it's a little bit inconsistent about it. So for the first 4 prologue chapters, you have full control over your entire party. But when you start controlling your hero in Chapter 5, all of a sudden the game decides, okay, the hero is the only one you control at this point. The rest of them are going to be AI for the rest of the game. And I don't mind the auto battle, honestly. The auto battling in this game works extremely well for what it is. You don't have a lot of great tactics options to work with, but the AI party members do well enough in assessing the situation that it's not so hindering that it completely ruins the game. But even still, it's kind of odd. It's not like Persona 3, where you can tell that the game was completely designed around that choice. I think they wanted to show off their auto battle tech, but kind of forced it in where they didn't need to, if that makes sense. But otherwise, Dragon Quest IV is phenomenal. If you haven't played it before, I'd honestly recommend it. Next up on the list is Final Fantasy XVI. I said before, earlier in the list, that I bought a PlayStation 5 to play one particular game. Of course, that is none other than Final Fantasy XVI. So it may be a little surprising to hear that it's in my didn't finish. I didn't finish the game. I'm sorry. Okay, so the game turned out to be a lot more divisive than I thought it was going to be. I mean, we all knew that Final Fantasy had been heading into the direction of an action RPG for a long time, for a while. I mean, 15 was an action RPG, Lightning Returns was an RPG, or action RPG. So the fact that Final Fantasy XVI is also an action RPG shouldn't have been surprising. It was kind of a little surprising that the combat director of Devil May Cry 5 was involved in this game as its combat director. And you can tell, honestly, there's a lot of talk about whether or not this feels like a Final Fantasy game. For my money's worth, it doesn't feel like one. It feels closer to a Devil May Cry than it does Final Fantasy. But even then, I have to say that the combat in 16 doesn't feel quite as tight and engaging as I thought it would. So the combat's a lot easier than I would have liked it to be. I think that enemies aren't quite as aggressive enough to be that much of a threat, and also they're very easy to knock down and get the bonus damage on them, so it makes it very easy to grind Limit Break. So honestly, combat, it's fun enough for what it is, but it's not like super engaging. And even the story, I was kind of surprised that I wasn't as engaged with the story as I expected to be. Everyone talks about Final Fantasy XIV, and that the Final Fantasy XIV staff are the ones that are like heavily involved in this game's development. I probably shouldn't say that definitively because I don't know who lines up one for one from the 14 and 16 staff lineup, but the director of both games, Yoshi P, a person a lot of people have a lot of respect for after 14 especially. I kind of hoped that 16 would be a litmus test for me to kind of prove to me that this man can write stories, and maybe Final Fantasy XIV does actually have the story that people tell me that it does. But I wasn't engaged at all with the storytelling. I lost track of it very easily. It's not as conventionally told. I'd say that Final Fantasy XVI feels kind of more like an opera play rather than a movie or a TV show that other Final Fantasies feel like. It's kind of an odd style that the series hasn't really explored since the older games, since debatably at least 9 or before. But even then, why was I so engaged with all those old Final Fantasies but not this one? I don't know. I don't have that much more to comment on it. Honestly, I'm interested to still go and finish it, but I was a little shocked that I wasn't quite as hooked on it as I expected to be. Would you look at that, we got a Fire Emblem game on the list. So, little bit of history. Fire Emblem Engage is a game, when it was announced, I was slightly concerned by. This game has a lot different of a vibe, outward facing, opposed to a lot of the other Fire Emblem games, especially Three Houses, which was one of the more adult and mature games in the series, I'd say. Engage is one of the most juvenile, I guess for a lack of a better term. It is one of the most, I don't want to say immature, but it is less mature than something like Three Houses was. And I was kind of worried about it. I was worried that maybe this wasn't a game that was made for me, and I was kind of curious how I was going to fall on it. Now, originally, I had a little joke, I had a little funny haha that maybe it'd be hilarious if I did not talk about my feelings on Fire Emblem Engage and did not hint one way or another how I felt about this game until I made my retrospective video on it. But I can't hold off any longer. It's not fair for the tier list, I don't think. So let's talk about it, shall we? Fire Emblem Engage has one of the most disappointing stories in the series. It is unambitious. It is a Fire Emblem trademark story if I've ever experienced one. It does have some redeeming qualities here and there, and it does succeed in places where I don't think it gets enough credit for, but in general, it is more or less a carbon copy conglomeration of Awakening and Fates, and does not challenge the series in a meaningful way. Its gameplay and combat is easily the best the Fire Emblem series has ever seen. It is absolutely and undeniably the most polished game in the series in terms of combat, in terms of strategy. There is a lot you can do with this game, and it's balanced expertly. I played most of the game on hard mode in my initial run. I switched it down to normal a little bit later. I'll go into the whole story when I get to my retrospective video, but on hard mode, this game's a blast, dude. This game is so perfectly balanced. Like, the difficulties in modern Fire Emblem games especially are not consistent at all. Difficulty design, it doesn't feel like it's been a priority of the series in a while. But normal mode feels on the easier side, but about as difficult as it should be, you know? Hard mode doesn't pull any punches. Hard mode comes out swinging. Hard mode expects that you know how to play this game. Maddening mode, even more so. It's debatably one of the easier maddening modes, probably even the easiest maddening difficulty the series has, or at least like the highest level equivalent in the series. This is like one of the easier games in that sense, but it's so well balanced. It's so fun. And the Emblem Rings offer a lot of ways you can customize units and build units, and there's so many units in this game. Dude, there's so many units. There's so many ways to build a team, and it's excellent and it's good. And you can change their classes to whatever you want, and each class has their own unique niches because they don't have weapon ranks that grow and level up with them. They're all locked to the classes, and it's good, dude. It's so good. But overall, at the end of the day, I think it's kind of telling that, to be honest, I kind of forgot a Fire Emblem game came out this year. Despite as good as it possibly was, its story just wasn't there, so it wasn't quite as emotionally resonant as I was hoping it would be, but that gameplay is just so phenomenal, dude. It's so good. I'm not sure exactly how this next game is supposed to be pronounced. Is it supposed to be... everyone says Furi, right? Because to an English native speaker, it makes the most sense the way it's spelled, the way it's pronounced, you know? But I also heard in the past it's supposed to be Furi, like a Japanese romanization of the English word free. I'm not sure. I don't know one way or another. I'm probably still going to call it Furi because that's the way it kind of makes sense to me to say. So I wanted to play Furi because I play a lot of RPGs, dude. I play so many RPGs. I play a lot of games that have stat numbers and progression systems and games that are at least 30 plus hours in length. I craved a game that was 5 hours long, that didn't have stats, that the challenge came down to everything that I could do with skill. And Furi was recommended to me a lot over the years. In fact, Furi was recommended to me before the game even became like particularly famous in like late 2017, early 2018, that period. I was recommended this game when it was still a Vita exclusive, before I even had a Vita. Was it a Vita exclusive? I'm curious now. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, Furi has never been on the Vita? That's wild. I can't believe I swore. I swear a friend recommended to me like a character action bullet hell game called Furi on the Vita. That's gonna bother me for years. But it was recommended to me for a long time, and I finally played it, and it was excellent. It is exactly what I craved, what I desired. For those not familiar, it is a boss rush style game, kind of similar to Punch-Out, kind of similar to Titan Souls, similar to Shadow of the Colossus, kind of. The premise is you are a prisoner, you got the opportunity to break out, and in order to fully become free, you need to defeat all 13 jailers in your way, each one progressively harder than the last. Sort of. There's exceptions in there for storytelling reasons. But I mean, the story's whatever. You can extrapolate some more meaning from there if you want to. I wasn't too worried about the story, but the action, the gameplay itself was excellent. Part of it is like bullet hell-ish, where you have a gun and you can shoot at the bosses, and they'll shoot back at you, and there's a lot of bullets that come back, and then once a phase of the boss is almost done, they'll engage into you with close combat, and then you have to worry more about parries and blocking and then striking back when you have an opportunity. So I feel like it's maybe a little bit harder to describe, but it's an excellent game, and I fully recommend it. It's not that long. It's like a 5-ish hour game, and a surprisingly effective story for what it is. Excellent game. Absolutely. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is another game that I wanted to play for years. Now, I know what console this came out for. This was originally a DS game, and I feel like I was in a weird camp where I knew about the game all this time. It's been building a cult following ever since it was released by a small, dedicated following, and then everyone else who didn't play Ghost Trick didn't know what Ghost Trick was. I feel like I'm the only guy who never played Ghost Trick, knew what it was, and wanted to play it ever since I learned about it. Now, that could be debated because it's like, well, if I wanted to play it all that time, why didn't I? I mean, between then and now, there was a 13-year gap. If I wanted to find a way, I could have found a way. But what makes Ghost Trick so special is its story. For those who aren't aware, this is a game that was created by the Phoenix Wright team at Capcom. They decided to take in a completely different direction with this new game. For the DS, wanted to take advantage of that. And the DS era, for the developers who really took advantage of it, they created some really experimental type games, which I don't think we'll ever quite get again. Indies are certainly kind of carrying on the spirit, but Ghost Trick is fascinating, and it's not a very complicated game. You play as a ghost, you can only move between inanimate objects littered around the environment, and you have to figure out how to manipulate those objects to solve puzzles, chiefly preventing murders from happening. And frankly, I don't want to say that much more than that. If you've not played this game, if you still have the pleasure of being blind to Ghost Trick, give it a shot, dude. Give it a shot. Oh my goodness, it's so good. Like, the style of this game is unmatched. This team had an animation budget, and they spent that whole budget, dude. It's great. The characters are so good. So yeah, play Ghost Trick. Missile is best boy. Missile's best boy. Keep on keeping on. God of War on the PlayStation 4. So last year, I played the original PS2 God of War for the first time all the way through. And at the end, I asked, hey, should I play the other PS2 and PS3 games? Should I skip to 4? What should I do? And I think almost everyone said, yeah, just go ahead, play 2 and 3 first. 4 can wait, right? But like I said, I got myself a PlayStation 5, and I already had 4. I bought it when it was on sale a while ago. So I said, you know what? Might as well. Might as well just play it now, get to experience the best version of it on PlayStation 5. Maybe it's somewhat better on PC, oh well. I enjoyed this game a lot more than I thought I was going to. I spoke of this last year. I said that I used to not like this game purely because it was popular, if I'm being honest. Isn't that wild how a thing can be popular, and things aren't popular for no reason, right? There's always a reason why things become popular. But because it was popular, I said, oh, people like it. I want to be different, so maybe it's not actually that good. And I think there was also kind of reason to be concerned about it too. It's like, it felt like God of War was abandoning what it was in favor of being more of what appeared to be a Last of Us kind of game, maybe a little bit too inspired by Last of Us. So it felt like a classic Sony series was losing its identity and selling out because there's another style out there that's more popular right now, which is absolutely silly and ridiculous, right? But doesn't change the way I felt at the time. So it was great to finally put all of that behind me this time and to just play the game, to experience it, and you know what? I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a lot. It was a refreshing kind of character action game. Was it absolutely excellent? Would I play it over a lot of others? To be honest, I wouldn't say so. But whenever I played it, I had a good time. It feels like a real adventure. You go around, you get to explore these big environments. They're not big environments. It's not like it's an open world game, but it has a nice progression system to it. It feels like you really are going on a journey with your son. You're having a great emotional journey between a boy and his father. The story was intriguing enough for what it was. I wasn't like absolutely over the moon for it or anything, but yeah, to be honest, it was a really solid action game, one that I really enjoyed, and the pacing is honestly phenomenal in this game. You're never in areas for longer than you need to be, but it always feels like the right amount of time you're in them. You get upgrades and new abilities and things like that relatively consistently throughout the game. And the story, let's go back to that for a minute, because one of my concerns about this new direction is that God of War, the original God of War games are kind of silly. They're kind of goofy. Whether or not that was intended of them, they are kind of silly, very mid-2000s era video games. But this one, it's like, we're gonna take God of War seriously now. It turned out to be not quite as serious as I was expecting. It knows when to keep up the tension. It knows when to play things straight, but there's a lot more sillier, kind of fun, quippy moments. Honestly, they're kind of like Marvel humor-esque moments, so they're not the most like absolutely hilarious dialogue and scenes in the world, but it's a little less straight edge than I thought it was going to be when playing it. Overall, really great time. B tier, I think, is a good place for it. Why not? You know what? It's good. It's good. I wouldn't say I'm like absolutely way more interested in God of War as a whole series now, but you know what? I'm glad to have played it, and I'm glad to say that game was good for a reason. People praised it for a reason, you know? Gravity Circuit is a game that I played this year. It won my Game of the Year award, not Game of the Year award, let's be a little more clear. End of the Year award, Best Mega Man game that Capcom is too afraid to make. So honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about Gravity Circuit. If you like Mega Man X, check this game out. That's really all that needs to be said there. You know what? Yeah, that feels like a good place for it. It just feels good to have a game by Mega Man fans who clearly love Mega Man, know that Mega Man could be so good if it came back. But Capcom, I guess Capcom's just not budging. It's been 5 years since Mega Man 11, dude. It's been 5 years since Mega Man 11, like, and nothing. We got more Legacy collections, sure, but I thought we would have gotten a new Mega Man game by now. Gravity Circuit, at least, is the next best thing. It's at least enough to hold me over until maybe an X9 comes out, you know? But yeah, I don't have way more to comment on there. Gravity Circuit's fun, don't get me wrong, but it's not like it's so interesting that it's like, oh, we need to talk about this game, dude. Here's all the cool things it does. It's a Mega Man X game. If you like Mega Man X, you're in for a good ride here. Next on the list is Panzer Paladin. I put this game next to Gravity Circuit because it's also another Mega Man type game inspired by Mega Man X, 8-bit-ish, Mega Man kind of like game, except instead of just being a robot, you play as a person controlling a giant mech dude. And it's got similar Mega Man style progression. You have an intro stage, and then after the intro stage, you get 8 more stages, and after those 8 stages, you get the final round, the final like Wily Castle-esque gauntlet. Panzer Paladin is interesting because it's all based around its weapon system. Weapons all have durability in this game. You can carry a few around at a time. They all degrade with every single hit and swing you do. The final attack of a weapon you do will do increased damage, and then you switch your next weapon, you have to use that weapon instead this time. They're all like one-handed sword type melee weapons, so it's not like too hard to figure out. It's very similar to Breath of the Wild's weapon durability system, to be honest, which might have triggered a reaction in some people, because I know it's not the most beloved system in the world, but it's kind of similar to that. It's what the game's built around. It's built around being slow and having slower attacks, and you need to be a lot more methodical with how you move around. It's not as twitchy action as something like Gravity Circuit. But also, I want to bring this up. Because Panzer Paladin has a live system. When you lose all your HP or when you fall down a pit, you lose a life. And this is a system that is now seen as very archaic, very old, very not aged very well in our modern gaming landscape, because us gamers are way too coddled. Those little Gen Z, those little millennial gamers, those little Gen Alphas with their iPads, they're so coddled. They're so complaining. Back in my day, we had live systems, and we liked. I think the live system gets way too much hate. I think it's misunderstood. Here's what the advantage of a live system does. Makes it better at the whole game. As a whole. When you don't have a live system, I've noticed, when you don't have a live system, it's a pass to play more recklessly. It's like, oh, if you fall in a pit, no big deal. You're back to the next checkpoint, do a little bit of the section of the level. In a live system, those lives are precious. Those lives mean something. If you lose all your lives, then you're going back way farther than before. And people are like, oh, that wastes my time. I proved I've done well enough at this section. Why can't I just progress and move on? I've done it before. Why can't it just let me pass? Well, you've done it before once. But can you demonstrate that same mastery again? Can you demonstrate that same mastery while also demonstrating mastery at all different points in a level? That's the advantage of a live system. That's why I can't agree when someone says it's an archaic system that doesn't work in the modern times. It does. It absolutely does work. Panzer Paladin is proof of that, dude. But by itself, it's also just a fun game. Honestly, little context for this one, this is a perfect game to play on a flight, on an airplane. I beat this game almost entirely in one sitting while on a flight. Perfect game for that. Honestly, those kind of Mega Man type games, perfect setting. Boot up your Switch, turn this game on, get to play through the whole thing. Works out very well. Honestly, yep, I enjoyed it more than Gravity Circuit. Okay, dude, now we've come to a real good one, Hi-Fi Rush. So there's not a whole lot of surprise here. If you happen to see my Game of the Year video from last year, you know that Hi-Fi Rush is my Game of the Year. When I say a game is one of my favorite games of all time, I don't say that lightly, you know? If I say a game is one of my favorite games of all time, it did something to earn that place, dude. Whether that be because it came around at the perfect point in my life, whether that be because it does something unique, whether that be because of historical value, frankly, or whether that be just because it's a game that has immense style. And I'd say most of all, Hi-Fi Rush falls under that last category. This game just vibes, dude. I talk about vibes all the time. I talk about the importance of vibes, and vibes aren't just like how you feel, it's how it makes you think about life, dude. So the whole purpose of Hi-Fi Rush is that it's a rhythm action game. It's Devil May Cry tied with Guitar Hero. It's what if you played a character action game where every single thing you do has to sync up with the music. And that's so great because it makes everything in the game feel cool. It makes it feel so cool, dude. And honestly, in general, I'm kind of at a loss for words. If you want more details, check out my Game of the Year video. Check out the standalone video I did on Hi-Fi Rush. Honestly, I could play this game over and over again. I'm still not sick of it, dude. I want to go back. I want to go back already because I had such a great time with it. Anyway, last year was a little bit distressing because I played The Legend of Heroes Trails from Zero. And the Trails series is one where I am one that is very quick to make fun of it because, I don't know, something about this series kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit, but Trails from Zero was a game that I really enjoyed. I put it in A tier last year. Honestly, I sometimes wonder if I should have put it in S. That's honestly how much I enjoyed it. And it made me look forward to the sequel, Trails to Azure. So these games came out originally in like 2010 or something like that. And this one either came out a few months later or the following year. So much like, let's say, a Golden Sun to Golden Sun The Lost Age, or Digital Devil Saga, Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga to Digital Devil Saga 2. These types of games are two parts of the same game, more or less. So it's not like Trails to Azure is some super innovating sequel. It's kind of more or less an expansion pack. Even still, it is able to separate itself from Trails from Zero because Trails from Zero didn't feel like a game that needed a sequel, if that makes sense. There was still some loose ends that obviously were going to be covered by Azure. But in general, I was satisfied enough by Zero alone that if Azure never happened, I would have never thought about it. But what's kind of interesting for the Trail series is that they're typically separated in duologies. listen, I know, we'll go through it. So Chosen Sky 1 and 2 are like one story, and then there's third, which is kind of a separate story, I think. I'm not too clear on third. I don't know that much about it. Then there's these two games, obviously the Crossbell games. We'll get back to those. And from what I understand of the Cold Steel games, I've played Cold Steel 1 and 2, and Cold Steel 1 and 2 are very much two parts of the same game in that case. So that is their own duology. And then from what I understand of 3 and 4, those are also supposed to be kind of the same game as well. So part 1 and part 2 is if that's one duology and part 3 and 4 is another duology, then together they also make up a duology, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how the series is structured. And what I've noticed so far is that the first game in their own respective series is meant to be kind of a fresh start, more or less. Now, these games build off of each other. I wouldn't say that Zero is a game where it's inconsequential if you haven't played the previous games. I'd say that if you played Sky 1 and 2, playing them is going to make you appreciate Zero more, but you could theoretically play Zero by yourself and not feel like you're missing out on anything. But the part 2 games in the series, so in this case, the Azures of the series, this is where it's a bit much more beneficial to have played the previous games, and this is where the games reward you for being a fan of the series. In a way, I'd say that makes sense. I'd say that's probably the best way to handle it, because if you're playing a sequel to an already really long game, then you probably are a fan of the series, and you probably can handle a lot more of the fan service and connecting the series together. In fact, the friend that initially got me into the Trail series told me that the more games in the series that someone plays, the more they will come to a greater appreciation, because then it becomes a lot more clear where all of the games start connecting to each other, because they're all one massive story, and they're all like taking place like parallel to each other, or like before and after in some cases. In the case of Azure, it takes place during the same time frame as Cold Steel 1 and 2. So I was able to notice a lot of events that happened in this game that weren't really explained all that well in Cold Steel, that I'm like, oh, so that's what was going on here. But in a way, despite this game having come out before the Cold Steel games, I'm almost kind of glad I played the Cold Steel games before I played this one. Because first of all, in my opinion at least, maybe I'm misremembering, maybe I don't really remember all that well, but I don't remember anything that was like so major in the Cold Steel games that felt like it was directly spoiling something that happened in this game. There's definitely a few moments for sure, but I didn't feel spoiled for this game outside of debatably what happens at the end. But we could argue that's kind of a running theme of the whole game. So I might as well just say spoilers for Azure here. What the whole story revolves around is this is a story of politics through and through. There is a lot of political moving and a lot of setting up of what's going to happen in future games in this game here. And that the dilemma that the regular ordinary citizens in this world of Crossbell face is that their way of life is being uprooted and that they're losing their power dramatically. Both economically, militaristically, they don't have much more legs to stand on, and everyone's doing power grabs at their land. I found it so hilarious that during the second chapter, which is the trade conference, you get to meet Chancellor Osborne, the overall antagonist of the series, and he's like, "Oh hey, Special Support Section, how's it going? By the way, how long do you think Crossbell is gonna last?" Because it's not gonna be long, dude. So yeah, in general, I'd say that Azure, honestly, kind of poorly paced. Maybe that's partly a self-inflicted wound because I did all of the side stuff that I could in this game. At least all the side stuff that I readily knew of. I didn't go out seeking like any of the hidden stuff, that is to say. So this took me like roughly 70 hours to complete, and then plus Trails from Zero, if you want to count that. That makes this a 130-hour game. I don't feel like it justifies that length, but I did feel kind of compelled to do it all because I liked Zero a lot, and I also love Crossbell as a setting because it's so small, it's so contained, and it feels a lot more personal than the other regions in the series that I've explored, because it really does feel like Crossbell is a whole community. And it does feel affecting and scary when places like the Empire and the Public are trying to vie at grabs for power for control over Crossbell, because it's like, this is my town, and for all I know in the future, it's not going to be my town much longer. Now, I knew about the ending, of course. I knew about the ending. And might as well just go into it. Speaking of the ending, I was satisfied with Trails from Zero's ending, because it felt like it truly did wrap up the whole story that was taking place over the course of that game, and even though it did leave open a few loose ends. But that's more relevant to the overall, like, overarching theme of the entire Crossbell arc. So I was fine with that. Zero felt like it was a conclusive game. Azure doesn't. Azure does not feel like a conclusive game at all. Azure quite literally ends with the goal that the SSS wanted to accomplish. They do that goal, and they're like, okay, well, we got to get out of this final dungeon because it's collapsing, and then it fades to black, and then it's like, and then the Empire invaded, and Crossbell is now under Empire rule, and that's the end of the game. It's like, go play Trails of Cold Steel 3 now, you moron. So yeah, I did enjoy Azure quite a lot. Honestly, you know what? I think I'm starting to come around on this series, which is a pain to say. It's so painful to say, but I think I'm starting to come around on this series a little bit. I think I might start becoming a Trails fan. Oh no, that's so scary. I think in the future I'm going to impose some more limits on myself. I'm not going to be doing every single side quest anymore. Like, the world building in these games is phenomenal. They put a lot of effort into it. It's too much. It hurts the pacing too much. But going forward, I mean, like, when I think about it, I've already played all the way through 4 games in this series already. And I only have, like, I only have 5 more 40-hour plus RPGs to go through, right? But I feel like it's maybe not so bad if I really put some time and focus and dedicate to it. So in conclusion, Trails to Azure, really fun game, capped out the Crossbell arc satisfactorily enough to me. In the end, I did prefer Zero more. Zero is still my favorite Trails game. Anyway, speaking of The Legend of, From Heroes to Zelda. And before we begin really talking about Tears of the Kingdom, if you don't mind, I would like to read to you an excerpt from a video I planned on maybe creating. It's canceled, so don't expect it anymore, but I think this is a really well written, from my perspective, really well written piece that will be helpful in going on to discuss the future, or discuss what this game meant and did for me, okay? So this is the beginning of the excerpt. Quote, Breath of the Wild is a game I have a famously complicated relationship with. I had been eagerly anticipating its eventual release even before the game was properly unveiled at E3 2014. Perhaps even being the first game I stayed up until midnight of its release to play, getting to experience the world was truly magical. Seeing all of my college friends grouped up together in the school lobby as we shared discoveries and solved puzzles together reminded me of similar experiences of playing single-player games together with my own family. But as the years went on, I felt somewhat cynical of what the game managed to accomplish. I felt that the game was overrated, being easily accepted into the echelons of greatness only because it had the name Zelda on the title. Perhaps the only reason it achieved commercial and critical success is because Nintendo could capitalize on the hype by marketing it as a Switch launch title instead of a Wii U swan song. Tears of the Kingdom was almost like a chance to play Breath of the Wild for the first time all over again. My playthrough proved to me that the success of Breath of the Wild wasn't a fluke. It reminded me of the same joy and excitement I had exploring Hyrule in my own way, inspiring moments of awe and fear as an organic part of the experience. I won't soon forget how impressed I was with the scale of diving from the heavens to the surface and into the depths with no loading screens to speak of. I'll still remember the utter terror of encountering my first Gleeok. I still remember the puzzles I solved in a way that probably wasn't intended by the development staff. And now that I finally played through and finished it, the one thought that has come to the back of my mind is that I left the game disappointed, unsatisfied by the core experience that the game offers. That may sound contradictory to my previous statements, but I assure that both are true. Tears of the Kingdom is a game that accomplishes what I think it set out to achieve. That being to make the world of Breath of the Wild more expansive and recapture the same feelings and experience. But since the game was first announced, I had a different set of expectations for it. Ones that have been informed by the games I grew up with, and the ones that it came out well before I was born. I suppose I didn't want Tears of the Kingdom to be a sequel to Breath of the Wild. I wanted it to be a sequel to Majora's Mask. Unquote. So we'll put a pin in that last section of the script for right now. We'll come back to that. So, to be honest, when I played through and finished Breath of the Wild, I had a very strange take that I wasn't quite sure how to process. I think this might be my least favorite Zelda game. Now, I sat on that for months because that sounded like too insane to really rationalize. Like, that can't be true. The newest Zelda game? My least favorite in the series? A game that I was disappointed by? That doesn't make sense. So I reflected on it for months. I'm like, okay, let's sit on that. Let's sit on that. Let's sit on that. Okay, you know what? I think I still agree with it. So, I've talked about this in previous years. Okay, Zelda 2. You said last time you talked about Zelda 2 in these tier list videos that was your least favorite Zelda game, and you said it was kind of different and stinky and bad. So how could a game that is refined, the same, and okay be bad, be worse than Zelda 2? And it's like, well, execution-wise, I don't think Tears of the Kingdom is a bad game. Like I said, I think it accomplished exactly what it set out to do. But let's talk about vibes. Let's talk about feelings. Let's talk about how a game makes me feel. Breath of the Wild, or Tears of the Kingdom is Breath of the Wild 2. I don't think that's a very controversial statement to make. I think that's very expected. Tears of the Kingdom expands on Breath of the Wild. It is the same world as Breath of the Wild, but more. It is the same kind of gameplay systems, but more. Everything that Breath of the Wild did well, Tears of the Kingdom does better. At the same time, everything that Breath of the Wild did poorly, Tears of the Kingdom does worse. And because of that, it manages to craft an experience that honestly feels maybe a bit too similar to Breath of the Wild. So what I do sometimes is, when I picture myself playing a game, I'll close my eyes, I'll think about it, and I picture myself playing the game in question. When I close my eyes and I think about playing Tears of the Kingdom, I'm not playing Tears of the Kingdom in my mind, I'm playing Breath of the Wild in my mind. And there may be a bit of confusion with that, because it's like, you know, don't you not like Breath of the Wild? And that's not true. Breath of the Wild is actually one of my favorite Zelda games. I like it because it's so different and so unique and so itself apart from the Zelda formula that had been established. Say what you will about the Zelda formula, but those games definitely had a progression structure and a formula in mind that Breath of the Wild completely subverted. Okay, so then what makes Tears of the Kingdom so different? Why can't we have a new Zelda formula now? Why are you punishing a game for using a new Zelda formula when the other games used the Zelda formula as well and you love those games? It's because this new Zelda formula feels a lot more formulaic than the other Zelda games ever felt. Compare Ocarina of Time to Wind Waker. Now compare Wind Waker to Twilight Princess. Now compare Twilight Princess to Skyward Sword. None of those games feel the same. They may have the same formula, they may have the same progression structure. In terms of tone, in terms of story, in terms of gameplay style, in terms of presentation, in terms of soundtrack, in terms of all of that, they are all completely separate, completely unique, completely themselves. And in particular, I wanna pay special attention to Majora's Mask, because Majora's Mask is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. It uses the same game engine, it uses the same graphics, it uses a lot of reused assets. It is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, and yet I don't think it's a coincidence that despite looking like Ocarina of Time, it feels completely different. Those two games do not play the same as each other. They don't feel the same as each other. Majora's Mask takes the framework that Ocarina of Time is, but spins it into a completely new direction, going for an entirely different approach. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Majora's Mask is one of the most beloved, recognized, and greatest video game sequels of all time, because it's not really a sequel to Ocarina of Time. It's something that is completely unique and its own. And that's where Tears of the Kingdom felt short to me. I was hoping that it would take the things that make up Breath of the Wild what it is, but then do something completely new with them. It feels kind of tiring to explore the same overworld all over again. Yes, it's changed, but it's changed only just enough. Yes, there are more dungeons, but the dungeons aren't that much better than Divine Beasts. And honestly, that's the thing that kind of hurts me the most about Tears of the Kingdom, is that it just doesn't have its own identity. Now, counterpoint that a lot of people bring up, it absolutely has its own identity. Where Breath of the Wild asks you to understand the physics of a puzzle, Tears of the Kingdom asks you to build something to overcome the physics of an obstacle. So let's talk about Ultra Hand for a little bit. Ultra Hand is an incredibly creative tool that allows you to build anything you want. You can mix and match all different types of materials together, do all sorts of crazy dumb things. You can make absolutely insane orbital death laser war crime causing machines, and the only limit you have is your own imagination. Counterpoint. What if your imagination sucks? Like mine. What if your imagination sucks and you realize that you don't really need anything that's all that absolutely creative when good enough is good enough? To be honest, I didn't experiment that much with all the different possible combinations of fusions and Ultra Hands and all that, because I don't see the need to put in the effort, because Ultra Hand is already very clunky. You have to really get things exactly where you want them to be, and even when you think they're in the right spot, sometimes they shift over different parts, and then you can't just take apart that one part, you have to take apart the whole machine and then build it all over again. So, kind of clumsy, but in the end, that's all I really want to say about Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom is my least favorite Zelda game, and that's very hard for me to rationalize, but when I say that, it doesn't feel wrong. And that's wild. Okay. Lethal Company is another, it's not a game you can finish already, it's a multiplayer game. There's not a whole lot to it, but I also didn't play it all that much that I feel like I have that much substantial to talk about it with. So we're going to just put in a didn't finish tier and talk about it for a little bit. This game became very popular very fast, and to be honest, I'm not sure I see the appeal. I'm not sure I see the game that became popular on Twitch that everyone else played. The whole premise of it is, I kind of liken it to Phasmophobia meets Five Nights at Freddy's. You have a job, your job is to collect scrap and bring that scrap back to your ship, and you gotta bring as much as you can because you have a quota to meet. To be honest, I'm not sure I see why this became so popular. I'm not sure I get it. And this is not to poo-poo on the game. This is not to take away the enjoyment others might have felt with this game. Personally, for myself, I just don't see it. That's all there is to it. I don't see the game that became the Twitch sensation that it ended up becoming. But it's still in early access, right? It's still being developed. I'm sure it's going to improve in the future. I'm sure it's going to become a lot better. And maybe after more time, I will see. But just want to talk about it a little bit. I did play it this year, and that's how I felt. It's like, just feels like a game. That's all. Okay. LunarLux is a game that I really enjoyed this year, and I kind of feel bad that I wasn't able to find a place to put it on my eventual Game of the Year list. For those not familiar, LunarLux is heavily inspired by the Mega Man Battle Network series, Battle Network and Star Force, and kind of other games like that. So you have your own special moves, and they all have like little quick time events and little mini games that are associated with them. So you got to do those mini games well to maximize damage. But also when you're done attacking, when you're done with your attack phase, then the enemy attacks, and they don't just do raw damage to you. They also have their own mini games. It's sort of like Undertale, sort of like Mega Man Battle Network. There's a whole bunch of different ways that enemies attack in. So the more or the less damage you take during the defend phase, if you want to say, that correlates to how much damage you actually take on your character. So in a way, I'd say it feels somewhat more like a traditional RPG than something like Mega Man Battle Network. I wouldn't say Mega Man. I would argue that Battle Network is an RPG, but it's not like traditional in the sense. LunarLux feels a little bit more traditional, and you know what? I also like its setting. I like the fact that it takes place on the moon. I have a soft spot for future tech setting video games, especially RPGs. I think more RPGs could use future tech settings, sci-fi future tech settings. It also features fan favorite character from the hit indie game Crosscode. Emily will jump scare you in the middle of a random town and just say, "Ha, you're slow, ha ha ha." She makes fun of you for being slow, I guess. That was very funny, to be honest. Its story, I don't really feel too particularly strongly about it. If you have a brain, you probably know where it's going from the moment it starts. I will say, maybe this is a spoiler, so skip ahead a little bit, go to the next timestamp if you don't want to hear the spoiler. This game is only part 1 to presumably a whole series that's upcoming, which I take issue with games that decide to end on cliffhangers, even soft cliffhangers, to be honest. Now, I understand that this is an indie studio. They don't have unlimited budget and resources, and they don't have the time and the resources to tell a full grand story yet. So I understand. I'm not, like, super holding against the game. And at least in the case of LunarLux, this is the most ideal scenario for if you're going to end a game on a cliffhanger, at least do this. But the main threat that is being built up over the course of the game turns out to not be the main problem of the game. I felt it to be a somewhat odd choice, but maybe given the context of future games and future stories in this series, that might end up being for the best. Who knows? But overall, it's honestly a really fun game. It's not like a super hard recommendation from me, but if you can manage to find it at a good time, at a good price, go ahead and give it a shot. Lonely Mountains Downhill is another technically didn't finish game, but I played enough of it that I feel we can talk about it a little bit more in depth. This is another game where it's just chill. There's no combat, there's no like hard objectives, there's no world-ending crisis. All this game is you just go down on a little bike. You go down on a little bike going down a mountain, and that's all there is to this game. Honestly, one of the most peaceful games. It was introduced to me by a friend. We were doing a bit of a cabin retreat, a cabin stay over a weekend, and one evening he just booted up his Switch. We started playing this game on TV, and he's like, honestly, just kind of a chill little game to chill us out, you know? And he was right. Honestly, game just works. Game just hits. What's kind of funny about this game is I've never played it in my own home, not once. I've only ever played it in other places, but not in my own home. I played it while I was traveling or just outside of where I live. Very fun. If you're looking for just honestly a Zen type of game, you do worse than this. So go ahead and give it a try. And oh boy, we come to a big one. Well, I mean, big metaphorically. We come to Mother 3. Mother 3 is an incredible game, dude. You know what? Let's get this out of the way right now. Mother 3 is my game of the year for a game that did not release this year. I love Earthbound. I even love Earthbound Beginnings. Both of those games mean a lot to me. Earthbound is one of the first games I really fell in love with on emulators. When I first learned what emulators were, and I got to try out a whole bunch of like different series, particularly like Nintendo series, which I never had the chance to before because this was pre-Virtual Console, maybe? Actually, no, it wasn't. was not pre-Virtual Console. Maybe it was. Who knows? I don't think so. I don't think so. But anyway, I got to play a lot of games that weren't on Virtual Console yet, particularly like Earthbound. And I fell in love with Earthbound so hard, dude. Earthbound was so good that when it released on Wii U and I heard about it, I ran down to my Wii U and started downloading that shiz immediately, dude. And then Earthbound Beginnings, kind of similarly. So what's funny about Earthbound Beginnings, when that game first came out, quote unquote, I was actually out of town at the time, and I did not have internet access at that time. So, and that was the time E3 was happening. So that was a very long week of not being able to watch E3, but it's just how it worked out. Rest in peace, E3, by the way. So I came back and this was before I had even watched any press conference of any kind. I was just browsing the Wii U Virtual Console or the eShop, the Wii U eShop at that point, and what do I see? I see a game called Earthbound Beginnings right there, and I'm like, huh? So I downloaded that immediately, which is funny because Earthbound Beginnings was actually the first Earthbound game I played. I played it for a little bit, and I'm like, I don't know about this. And then I went to play Earthbound on Super Nintendo, and then I'm like, okay, yeah, this is more like it. But I loved Earthbound. I loved Earthbound Beginnings when I finally got around and gave that a shot. And those are both very creative and fun and amazing games. And then there was the matter of Mother 3. But I mean, like, in 2013, Earthbound was announced and released on Virtual Console again. In 2015, Earthbound Beginnings, which previously never came out in North America. It almost did, but it didn't. It finally came out here in 2015. So in like 2015, 2016, even 2017, I was like, I don't need to play that fan translation. I don't mind waiting until the official things comes out. So I waited. And I waited. And I waited. Until I finally said, okay, you know what? I'm done waiting. And I mean, who knows how long it will be before Mother 3 comes out, if it even comes out, because the more the years pass by, the less likely it seems again. And you know what? In a way, I am happy that I waited as long as I did, because the story of Mother 3 is incredible. This is not the perfect video game story, but this is my video game story. If I could tell a story, it would probably look something at least kind of similar to Mother 3. Mother 3 is a game where the world seems so big and joyous and freeing until it slowly starts crumbling in on itself. Before capitalism gets in the way, you know. But at its heart, it's about tragedy affecting a family. It's about brotherly love, brotherly rivalry, and I'm not going to spoil the game, but the ending is 10 on 10, dude. Play this game just for the ending. This game has an absolutely incredible story. But I'm not going to say any more, dude. Just go play this game. Play this game for the story. Play this game for the gameplay, too. This is easily the best playing of the Mother trilogy. In general, I would say it's even my favorite game of the Mother trilogy, absolutely. I have a huge soft spot for Earthbound that, in a way, Earthbound is one of my favorite games of all time. And so is Mother 3. Mother 3 is also one of my favorite games of all time now, because it does play the best of the Mother series. Most fluid, most convenient gameplay. And where the battle systems of the previous Mother games was a bit basic and trivial and not that well designed, Mother 3 is a lot more fun. It's more challenging. It's a lot more action focused. It has a really neat system where if you attack an enemy and you attack the enemy to the beat of the song, you get a little bit of extra bonus damage, which can actually help out. And you know what? Hi-Fi Rush prepared me for it, baby. Let's go. No wonder those two games are in the Game of the Year, you know? But I mean, what more can and should be said about Mother 3? If you haven't played Mother 3 yet, go play it. And if you played Mother 3, you already know why it's so incredible. Anyway, let's move on. Persona 5 Royal. So, mentioned at the beginning of the list, I did not include any games which I had played previously before. Persona 5 Royal is the one kind of exception to that. I have played the original Persona 5 before. I really like the original Persona 5. Haven't played Royal yet, though, so this was my first time experiencing Royal, experiencing the new additions and new content and things like that. So let's start with the original Persona 5. Back in 2016 and 2017, I think I got into the Persona series at the perfect time. This was still when Persona 5 was being somewhat hyped up. It wasn't like super high profile on the radar yet. But at that time, I played through Persona 4, and then I played through Persona 3, and I feel like that put me in the perfect position to really be hyped for and appreciate and ready to play Persona 5 when it would come out. And I fell in love with it, dude. Persona 5 was my game of the year in 2017. I wouldn't say it was my game of the year without question, because 2017 was a banger year, dude. Holy crap. But at the time, given all the games I played throughout the year, I said that, yep, Persona 5 was my favorite game. But over time, I began to become a little less charitable to it. I found some things that I kind of disagreed with the game design intent and game direction of, and Persona 5 wasn't quite as tightly designed as I thought it was, and it wasn't quite as great as I thought it was. A lot kind of compounded and annoyed me, and it also stayed in the conversation for a long time, and this is kind of an unfortunate thing when a game is popular, it can't just exist, you know? In a way, it's eventually going to annoy you with, like, just existing, and people just sharing their love for it, and they're like, oh, this is the greatest game ever, and to me, Persona 5 was always the weakest of 3, 4, and 5, that particular trilogy. So it kind of annoyed me when like people were like, "Oh, Persona 5's the best game ever." It's like, but the other games are better, dude. And it's like, and it's just something I have to put up with. But I think because of those factors, over time, the truth of the matter kind of became lost in my mind. My cognitive perception of the game became corrupted and distorted by false desires and false thoughts. Because playing Persona 5 Royal this time, I fell in love with Persona 5 all over again. Persona 5, I realize now, actually was all this time one of my favorite games of all time, dude. I almost kind of want to put it in Game of the Year, but I mean, like, technically, this isn't the first time I played Persona 5, you know? I mean, I know it's the first time I played Royal, so I could have made that distinction if I wanted to, put it above Mother 3, because honestly, I would say that I enjoyed Persona 5 more than Persona 3, or Mother 3 in this case. Sorry. You know what? Screw it. This is my list. This is my rules. If I can have a GOTY for best game I played last year, if I can have a GOTY for best game I played last year that did not come out last year, why not have a GOTY award for the best game I played last year, which I had played previously? You know what? Screw it. Screw it. It deserves it, dude. I realized with Persona 5 Royal that the Persona series blowing up with 5, with it seeing as much of a meteoric rise as it has, I realize now it wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fluke. It absolutely checks out that Persona 5 became the popular one. I mean, I know Persona 4 was, like, certainly popular within its own niche, but 5 hit the mainstream. 5 like, proved to people that JRPGs maybe kinda rock, dude. And honestly, it's because it's not style over substance. The style is the substance, dude. Opening up that casino mission right at the start of the game just hits, dude. I remember back in 2017, some friends of mine were over at my house, and one of them was like, "Hey, Persona 5, what's that game like? Is that game really as good as people are saying?" So we booted it up, we put it in my PlayStation 5, or PlayStation 4 at the time, excuse me. We put it in my PlayStation 4, we started playing the game, and that opening mission, the mystery and the intrigue that came with it, at the beginning of the game, Joker jumping between the lights at the top of the room, when he gets that little battle arena and he jumps up and rips off the mask of the guard, revealing Moloch, and then you do that critical hit right away. My friend was sold on this game immediately. He became a Persona fan in that moment right there. And the whole rest of the game is stylish. This game has style in spades. This game doesn't know when to drop its style, dude. It just keeps going, man. And there's definitely a lot of like annoyances I have with kind of the overall gameplay progression and gameplay structure and gameplay framing of Persona 5 still, but Royal fixes a lot of the problems that I used to have, and I would say that in general, because fun fact, I actually don't like a lot of the updated Persona re-releases, like Persona 3 Portable. I guess I'm somewhat like ambivalent to Portable because I haven't really played that much of it, if I've even played it at all, to be honest. Persona 4 Golden, I actually don't like. I way prefer the PS2 game over Golden. But Persona 5 Royal it doesn't compromise on what the original Persona 5 was, adds more with very few drawbacks. So in general, yeah, if you're going to play Persona 5 for the first time, you probably should play the Royal version. I mean, not like you have much choice. That's the version that's available on every platform right now, right? But Royal is good enough to the point where if you didn't like the original Persona 5, I think Royal might be able to change your mind. I honestly think it's that much of an improvement over the base game. But speaking of Royal, let's talk a little bit about the new content it added. So this is going to be spoilers for the rest of this little section. I'm not going to go too far with it, but if you want to skip ahead. Timestamps are in the bottom description below. But the new characters, Kasumi, I'm kind of whatever on Kasumi, to be honest. If they were gonna add a new party member, I suppose that was the best way to do it. I'd rather she not be there, to be honest. I think she kind of upsets a metaphorical balance in the Phantom Thieves, if I'm being honest. I don't know, just gives me weird vibes. But Dr. Maruki, the star of the show, maybe my favorite video game antagonist of all time now. What I find so fascinating about Maruki is that he's the perfect final target for the Phantom Thieves. Because he's not malicious, he's not evil, but at the same time, he's ruled by distorted desires. He has a power very similar to that of the Phantom Thieves, being able to forcibly change the cognition of others. But at the same time, he doesn't use that power maliciously. And it's tempting for the Phantom Thieves to ignore him and just let him go, but that would also be running away from the justice that they were supposedly trying to achieve over the past year. They gave courage to people to have them stand up for themselves and to stand up themselves to people who were forcibly enacting their will upon others. And Maruki is not doing so with evil intent, but he is also a man with distorted desires, imposing his will on others and not giving them the courage to stand up. So I think he presents a very interesting moral dilemma for the Phantom Thieves that got me to think about the story well beyond the time I spent playing the game. But yeah, Persona 5's great, dude. Love it. Pizza Tower is another great game from this year. Okay, hear me out. I love Pizza Tower and Ghost Trick both. However, I think about Ghost Trick more than Pizza Tower, okay? Pizza Tower is a very fun game. It's another game where the style is the substance. It's a very famous game. It's been making the rounds. It's been extremely beloved. It's been pushed all over the place because people fell in love with this game, and they fell in love with it hard, as they should. Pizza Tower is incredible, dude. What makes Pizza Tower so incredible is that it's incredibly approachable, but it's a game that has an extremely high skill ceiling, and I'd argue also an extremely high skill floor as well. This game has a very awkward and very deliberate control scheme, if that makes sense. if you want to perform well at this game, you have to be an absolute master at it. If you want to even perform like halfway competently, you have to be a master at it. But at the same time, it's also so forgiving that if you just want to play through the game, just finish it level by level, you don't need that much skill to get through the game. But also what's really great about Pizza Tower is that every single level has its own identity to it, its own theming. I think every level has its own background song, which is impressive as it is, and its own visual theme as well, and even most of them have their own gimmicks associated with them. You get completely new and unique power-ups in individual levels that you'll never see again. Pizza Tower throws so many ideas at the wall, and it never feels like it's running out, and it feels like it's worth going to every level just to see what they all have to offer. And also it's just humorous. Peppino Spaghetti is an absolutely hilarious main character, and I love him. I don't have too much more to say about it, so let's move on. Professor Layton and the Curious Village is another did-not-finish game. So I started this one. To be honest, I initially started it maybe about midway through the year, after the newest Professor Layton game for Nintendo Switch was announced. I started playing the original Layton, because this is another series that I've been recommended on for many, many years. But I started up. I only played it one session earlier in this year, but then I started up again on stream. www.twitch.tv/crystalfields, by the way. So I started up on stream, playing it on stream, and I think this makes for a really great stream game because it's fun to see me lose my mind. So I wouldn't say that any of the puzzles in Professor Layton are particularly difficult, let's say. They're forgiving enough where you can just keep trying. It's not you'll never get into a fail state by not being able to solve puzzles. And even like the harder puzzles are optional, more or less, so you don't have to engage with those. But it does feel nice to have just a collection of puzzles to solve, but the fact that it's framed around a story, that it's framed around characters, the fact that that all has to do with an overall mystery, I think makes it compelling rather than just being a puzzle collection that you could buy at a bookstore, you know? Overall, my one kind of like criticism is that the puzzles don't have like much at all, if anything, to do with the actual narrative and what's going on in the world. It's just like, oh, I see a candle. This reminds me of a puzzle, Luke. Can you solve it, Luke, my boy? You've done it. So yeah, I made it pretty far throughout the game. I'd say probably more than halfway. But to be honest, I don't know. I don't know how far I made it. I was hoping to finish it by the end of the year, but then one of my dumb family members got me sick over the holidays, so I decided to rest my voice and not stream. But we'll get back to it one day. We will get back to it, that's for certain. Pseudoregalia is a game I was made aware of a few months ago, and as soon as I saw it, I knew, yeah, that's a game I want to play. So it is a 3D platformer that's kind of more modeled after games like Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine. Specifically, what it's going for is a lot more movement tech focused 3D platforming. It encourages you to come up with your own style of moving about the world and to approach the world in a way that makes sense to you. It is a Metroidvania, so you'll start out with a basic jump, and that's all you get, and then you get your baton, and then that baton opens up new pathways, and then you get things like the slide, and then the double jump, and then the wall jump, and then things like that. Actually, I don't remember if there's a double jump in this game, to be honest. You kind of make your wall jump into a double jump if you use it right, but regardless, that's not the point. So it is a Metroidvania. There is combat to it, but I honestly think it would have been a better game if there wasn't combat in it, if that makes sense, because moving is the draw of this game. You're here for the movement, and it's absolutely great, absolutely incredible. You know, yeah, I'd say that's right. I'd say that's right. Not a whole lot to it. It's a very short game. You can beat it in maybe like 4 or so hours. Not expensive. Go ahead and pick it up. Okay, so coming back to the PlayStation 5 that I bought earlier this year. So one of the games I wanted to get ever since the PlayStation 5 was announced was Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, because it looked super fun and I wanted to play it. So that was one of the first games I got along with my PlayStation 5, but while it was still on its way in the mail, I figured maybe it would be a good idea to see where the whole series started. Because I haven't really played Ratchet and Clank growing up. I played a little bit of Ratchet Deadlocked, and that was the only game in the series I played. And if you feel bad for me, like, oh, I'm so sorry you played Ratchet Deadlock and that was your only exposure to the series, I thought Deadlocked was fun. So don't feel too bad. Ratchet and Clank the original, I decided to pick that one up and play it just to see where the whole series started. And what kind of shocked me is that I don't want to say the game aged poorly, because that's not a phrase I particularly like using, but looking back with hindsight, it's a little bit more rough than kids who grew up with it probably remember. It's a little bit more rough. The controls are very loose. The gunplay is not very fun. The levels are not very exploratory. There's not a whole lot to do in the levels aside from combat, aside from collecting nuts and bolts and gears and upgrading your weapons. There's not a whole lot to do in terms of world design and all that. That being said, game's so fun that it doesn't matter. It's not a game that I absolutely loved heads over heels over. To be honest, it technically should go in the didn't finish tier, because I got to the final boss and I gave up, because here's the thing, final boss I found to be very challenging. And I partly find it to be very challenging because, to be honest, I don't really like the PlayStation 2 controller for action games. It's pressure sensitive buttons. Maybe this is just my controller, but I feel like you really have to press down a button in order for it to register. So you have to push down a little bit with a little bit more force than I feel is comfortable. So I can't just like quickly jump around. I have to like put a little bit effort into jumping around. So controls on a PlayStation 2 game aren't always as responsive as I would like them to be. But I mean, like, if I got to the final boss and gave up there, if I still watched the ending on YouTube anyway, like, more or less I finished it, right? So, yeah, like I said, it's definitely kind of held back, and I think hindsight isn't helping my case here, because based on even only Deadlocked alone, I knew how much the series had evolved at that point, and I think the later games in the series knew how to play into its strengths a lot better. But speaking of later games, let's go to the latest game. Isn't that funny? I jumped from the very first game to the very last game of a series, a whole like 20-ish year chronology, all in a weekend. It was a bit of a shock. So I guess by technicality, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is my favorite Ratchet and Clank game. I wasn't as like super in love with it. I think that's a good place for it. I wasn't as super in love with it as I maybe expected to be, but like I said before, I think at this point in the series, the games know what it wants to be a lot better. In a way, I think I maybe should have held off a little bit more when playing this game, because I was used to the Blargs, or was it his name is just Blarg, or was the species named Blarg? Capitalist guy. I was like, wait a minute, the capitalist guy is the big bad guy of the series, and then suddenly it's like, it's me, Captain Nefarious, the long-running villain. I'm like, I don't know who you are. So I feel like there's a lot more of like payoffs going on for a Ratchet and Clank fan that was kind of going over my head a little bit. But you know what? It wasn't like bad enough I felt left behind. But I do think if I had played even a few more games of the series, I would have come to a greater appreciation for this game. But dude, this game looks pretty. Like, video games look pretty now. It's a shame that we destroy our game developers' like emotional sanity to make them. But not a whole lot much more to add beyond that. Like, this was one of the first games I played in the year, so there is a big gap in that time. My memory is not quite what it used to be, and it wasn't very good to begin with. So, but it was an enjoyable game. Given the placement on the tier list, I'd say, like, I guess that's not quite the middle of the pack at this point, but like middle of B tier is about a good place for it. Resident Evil 4 is... Let's preface this. The original Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time. I first played that game back in 2017, and when I think about that, I got to play 3 of the best games that I played in 2017 again this year in their updated re-releases. I mean, we got Persona 5 Royal. I know that didn't come out this year, but we got Persona 5 Royal. I got to play Persona 5 again. Resident Evil 4. I got to play Resident Evil 4 again through its remake. And Tears of the Kingdom. I got to play Breath of the Wild again. The hat trick, baby. I'm living in 2017 too, baby. And guess what? If you look at the calendar for this year, the calendar dates match up with 2017. It's literally 2017 too, my dudes. Anyway, Resident Evil 4. So, what's funny is that for the lead up of this game, I originally had the idea of, on my channel, hey, what if I made a Resident Evil 4 video every single week in the month of March until the remake came out? Because it came out the day before my birthday, if I'm not mistaken. So what if we did a video every single week, and then the final week of the month could be like my review of Resident Evil 4 Remake alongside the original, and we get to compare and contrast them, and we get to talk about how great the remake is, right, guys? I was not able to follow through with that because at the beginning of last year, I got a job, and I was going to school at the time still, so I was busy, and I didn't have time to make a whole month of videos. And you know what? Maybe that was for the best in hindsight, because this would have been the thumbnail of the video about the Resident Evil 4 remake. Resident Evil 4, not for me. That's a great thumbnail, in my opinion. I think I struck a genius on that one. Not that I was at all prepared to make a video on Resident Evil 4 Remake, but I think that would have been a banger thumbnail is all I'm saying. But let's address that. Resident Evil 4 was not for me. That's a real shame. One of my favorite games of all time, a remake that I was really looking forward to, and even beyond all that, a remake that is absolutely beloved. I've seen a lot of people say that Resident Evil 4 Remake replaces the original for them, that this is overall a better experience. And I cannot disagree more. The thing about the original Resident Evil 4, one of my favorite games of all time, is I was incredibly unsure how a remake of that game would even turn out. And I mean, I was along with the rest of the people who said that, does Resident Evil 4 really need a remake? And even to this day, I still don't think Resident Evil 4 needed a remake. I don't think a lot of games need remakes, to be honest. I'm getting kind of sick of the remakes, dude. That's a little digression. I digress on that one. I don't think it needed a remake. Resident Evil 4, it was the pioneer that laid the footwork, the groundwork for third-person shooters as a genre going forward. And it's not quite modern. It's not quite contemporary. A gamer who is used to playing third-person shooters with 2 analog sticks will go back to Resident Evil 4 and think, this game hasn't aged very well. Bad. So I think if you are a person who complains about the original Resident Evil 4 not being dual analog controlled, you're gonna love this remake. I think in that case, Resident Evil 4 is for you, but it's not for me. It is not for a person that understands what good game design is. So the thing about Resident Evil 4, the original, is that yes, its controls were limited. It is technically still tank controls that people have complained about with the old RE games, but it was a little bit more tolerable because of the camera angle being centered behind the character's back made sense to them. And the whole game was built around those controls. Capcom knew that Leon could not move and shoot at the same time, so it built the entire game, the entire enemy design, the entire level layouts, all of it was built around the player's control scheme. And I know that people say that Resident Evil 4, the original, was a game that was really long. It was a very long game. I mean, it's like a 20-hour game on a first playthrough. But it has remarkably good pacing. They squeezed every single possible idea they could out of the basic control movement style of Leon from that game, and then they added on to that, and they found new ways to add on to that, and they take away the ideas that you don't need for a little bit and then reintroduce them, and then that game is incredible. The game is long, but it moves by. It schmoves, dude, because it's just that much fun. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a game that can't get away with that anymore. If people were to play a third-person shooter with only one analog stick anymore, they'd lose their minds. They'd go ballistic. They'd be like, did they learn nothing from the many games that inspired it? So, to go along with the theme, to build upon the other Resident Evil remake games that came out, Leon can move and shoot at the same time, and then he can parry with his knife. He has a lot more options. There's a lot more options in this game. And to me, this complicates the game. This takes the framework that made the original Resident Evil 4 remake so special, and it complicates it. And people say that, oh, Resident Evil 4 remake is so much better, so much more fun, so much more action-packed and engaging because, well, now that you can move and shoot at the same time, the enemy has become a lot more aggressive to compensate. And it's like, that's the problem. Leon, you played the Resident Evil remakes, right? Leon moves around not very fluidly. Leon moves around like a very large block of tofu, dude. He's not very mobile. He's not very mobile, and I think that the game feels like Leon is more mobile than he actually is because the enemies almost feel a little bit too aggressive. Like in the original RE4, enemies don't attack you all at once. They will attack you one at a time. They will give you a fighting chance, but it doesn't feel like it because of the tension and the controls and the moment and having to expertly aim shots and be very precise with your shots made that feel tense, made that feel exciting. In Resident Evil 4 Remake, it's building off the very shaky aim, the very imprecise aim of the original Resident Evil 2 Remake. And that worked for Resident Evil 2 Remake because you're never facing down more than 2 enemies at the same time. Okay, maybe like 3. You're never facing down more than 3 enemies at the same time, and they all move slow, and the shakiness and the imprecise nature and aiming of the guns feel right in that game because you're balancing out, you're matching each other's pace. But the enemies being more aggressive in this game with a control style and movement style that feels loose and awkward, that doesn't fit. That doesn't work well, in my opinion at least. I don't think that this game controls very well. And it boggles my mind that people say, oh, the controls and the level design and the enemy layouts is way better in the remake as opposed to the original, when it's like, did we play the same games? I almost don't feel like I did. And even the story, they can't remake the original RE4 story as it is. They can't do it for 1-to-1. The original RE4 story is too dumb to do again, and given that the tone they've established with the recent remakes, 4 does not fit in that canon anymore. They had to remake it. I mean, it didn't need to be remade, but they had to. And now it looks like they're gonna have to remake 5 too, because now that's gonna be whatever. The point is that Resident Evil 4 Remake is not the game that I wanted. It's not the game that I thought I was gonna get when it was announced, when it was being hyped up, and I got suckered in for that hype. And that's a shame. And it's a shame because I didn't want things to turn out this way. I genuinely wanted to love Resident Evil 4 Remake as much as the original. I want to be out there with the rest of the people saying that, no, Resident Evil 4 doesn't really replace the original. They complement the original. You can enjoy both and have a great experience no matter what. For my money's worth, no. The original RE4, hands above feet, is absolutely way better than the remake. And, you know, I was telling a friend this earlier in the year, and he's like, yo, dude, Resident Evil 4 Remake's so good, right? And I'm like, I don't like it that much. I don't think I care for it. I don't know, dude. And it's like, and then we had to talk about it, and I came to the conclusion that, you know, if the original Resident Evil 4 is a bicycle, Resident Evil 4 Remake is a motorcycle. And it's like, well, both have two wheels, and you steer both of them with the handlebars, so therefore they're the same, right? And it's like, no, you have a whole different set of laws and rules and regulations and maintenance procedures and things you need to pay attention to and safety guidelines and all that. Those are completely different between those two vehicles. They're not the same vehicle, despite their similar shared attributes. So that's where I'm kind of coming from, is I can ride a bicycle here and back all the way, but I'm not motorcycle licensed. Don't expect me to be put on a motorcycle and be able to drive it. Anyway, that's a shame. Let's talk about a game that I enjoyed this time. Sea of Stars is S tier for me. It comes close to being GOATY. You almost have to wonder if this game is so highly beloved just because it's aping off of Chrono Trigger, you know? But at the same time, Chrono Trigger is a good game. You could copy from way worse games than Chrono Trigger. So Sea of Stars was a game I was looking forward to a long time. I never supported the Kickstarter or anything like that. In hindsight, I kind of wish I did, you know, just to throw a few dollars at a game to make their dreams come true. But I mean, it all worked out in the end. I bought it twice, so Sabotage is chilling with my money right now. But Sea of Stars is a very great RPG. It combines a lot of great ideas together. It's not just an homage to Chrono Trigger. It pulls in a little bit of Super Mario RPG. It pulls a little bit of Golden Sun, or maybe Lufia if you want to keep in line with the Super Nintendo RPG vibe. Maybe even a little bit of like Secret of Mana in there too. Mana? What did I say? Mana? Secret of Mana. But overall, it's a conglomeration of the best ideas from that era of video games come together. I do kind of want to compare it to a game I also really loved from last year, Chained Echoes. In general, I'd say that Chained Echoes is the better game between the two, because both, I'm not just comparing them out of nowhere, both are kind of like Chrono Trigger-esque inspired games. Both are like conglomerating a lot of the best ideas from the RPG together, but these kind of have two branching philosophies for what that entails. Chained Echoes is the better game of the two. It has the better story, better writing, better battle system, but Sea of Stars has the better vibes. Sea of Stars has overall the better art direction, the better soundtrack maybe. That's debatable. But it's punching equally with Chained Echoes. You could make a debate between those two games, but this isn't a Chained Echoes review. This is a Sea of Stars review. My work phone is going crazy. I think something's going on in the workspace. It's after hours. It's 7:30. It's a Friday, dude. Go to bed. Dating and time in the video. So yeah, honestly, both are great games. But you know what I like about Sea of Stars is it has Garl, the best character. Just absolutely fun nature. I wouldn't say like the character writing and like the party members is a very strong cast, but Garl really carries the whole thing. Love Garl, dude. Love Garl. We stand Garl in this house. You know what I also love about this game is its battle system. So it's a game that pushes you to use your special moves as much as possible, but it kind of limits how much you can use them, but it also gives you the opportunity to get your magic points back really easily. All you have to do is basic attack, you get your magic points back. Dude, I always want to see an RPG where there's still reason to use your basic attack over your super cool magical spells. I always want to see that, and I always appreciate a game that does that. I also love that enemies, when they're casting a very powerful attack, will have a list of attack types that if they are matched and hit with those attack types, their spell breaks and they won't be able to cast it anymore. But if you only get some of them, that weakens the spell, and it's great. I also love that you can just switch your party members in and out anytime you want. You can actively choose between which character you want to take their turn first. without using like a turn order system like other games do, and it's great. I like that. It's very great, very good battle system there. When your characters get knocked down, you can use a healing item on them if you want. You can use a spell to bring them back to life, but guess what? You don't have to. They just need to wait a few turns, and once those turns pass, they'll get back up again. It encourages being able to hold out and wait until your party member stands back up and being able to use them again and use your options again. It's great. You know what I also love about this game is if your party member is down and the battle ends, they're still getting experience points. And you want to know why they're still getting experience points? Is because each character doesn't get individual experience points which contribute to their own levels. The whole party has an experience bar. Do you know how long I've wanted to see a game, an RPG, a JRPG, use a party-based leveling system? This is the only game I know of that does it, and why did it take this long for that to be the case, dude? Fundamentally, when you think about it, what reason do characters have to have their levels be separate from each other? I mean, they're all, in many regular RPGs I've played, they're all floating around the same level anyway, so what difference does it really make for them to be separated? Why not have just one experience bar that the whole party shares, and that way everyone's scaled to the same level and it just works? And you don't have to worry about characters getting knocked down and then losing that on experience. No, they all get experience, dude. And then you get to choose what bonuses you want when you level up. So it makes leveling up feel like an event and very exciting. And that's great. But yeah, Sea of Stars is really great. It maybe it's not like the most like super great RPG to have come out within the last few years, but it works well enough for what it is, and charming, and it works, and it's great. But speaking of, let's talk a little bit about the Messenger, because Sea of Stars is in the same shared universe as the Messenger, and originally I intended to play the Messenger before I played Sea of Stars. That being said, just didn't work out that way, because don't know if you know this, but there's just too many games out in the world. You can't play them all, but the Messenger was on sale for like $1 when Sea of Stars came out, so it's like, oh, let's pick up both together. I played Sea of Stars first, not necessarily realizing it was a prequel to the Messenger, so in a way, I'm kind of glad that I waited as long as I did to play the Messenger, because, well, now I'm not worried about like how all it connects together, and I'm not worried about how the references in Sea of Stars that clearly allude to the Messenger and how that all relates together, which is kind of funny because this isn't really a spoiler, so don't worry about this, but at the very end of Sea of Stars, you see a thing that's later in the Messenger, and that means nothing to you if you've played Sea of Stars, and you're like, well, what's that about? And then you play the Messenger, and you see that, and you're like, oh, that's what that is. And there's even a level in the Messenger where they talk about, oh, the Solstice Warriors, and they were guardian gods or something. Whatever, it's a huge legend. No one knows about it anymore. I have to kind of wonder if they always intended on making a RPG featuring the Solstice Warriors, or because I know the studio lead, I don't know his name off the top of my head, I apologize, but the studio lead at Sabotage was like, yep, I always wanted to make an RPG, but I didn't want it to be the first game we made, because we didn't have the experience, but I knew I always wanted to do it. And I have to wonder, was Sea of Stars the RPG he always had in mind, or did he just kind of like the lore that was built around the Solstice Warriors and like, oh, let's make the RPG about that, you know? But anyway, I've talked a long time about the Messenger without talking about the Messenger, haven't I? So, very simple premise to start out. It's a very, very simple Ninja Gaiden-like. You have levels, you go through those levels, and it's a very fun, solid game. Nothing extraordinarily beyond what it is, you know? I mean, it's just a nice little ninja game. Not like super ridiculously hard like Ninja Gaiden, and very, very forgiving, but it's got nice style to it. Soundtrack's incredible. The level theming is okay. I mean, it's very standard, although I do love the, what is it, mushroom swamp, that area with the singing mushrooms. The singing mushrooms, nice touch on that. And that area is also in Sea of Stars as well. So it's all connected there. But a very, very simple game. But once you get to what is presumably the final level, or at least getting close to the final level, the twist happens where it turns out, oh, this 8-bit Ninja Gaiden style game, guess what? Turns out you're playing a 16-bit Sega Genesis Shinobi style game, you idiot. So then, yep, you're playing a game with whole new graphical fidelity. And then you keep going for just a little bit longer than that, and guess what? It's actually a Metroidvania, and in order to progress in this Metroidvania, you have to switch back and forth between the past in the 8-bit and the future in the 16-bit, and it's a fun gimmick. It's not like it's the most absolutely incredible game out there, but for what it is, it's honestly really fun, and I'm glad to have finally played it after all this time. I do have to throw a little bit of shade at the ending, though. It is one of those endings where it's like you beat the final boss, there's a little bit of resolution, and then it's like, okay, now we actually beat the final boss, and then the game ends. No resolution, no falling action, ends at the climax. My least favorite ending in the world. Do have to throw that shade. Anyway, moving on to Super Mario Bros. Wonder. And I would say it goes right about here. So honestly, it's a 2D Mario game. It's definitely more creative than your average 2D Mario game, but because there's not a whole lot to say otherwise. What I do like is that Nintendo acknowledged that with Super Mario Maker, they can't just make a regular 2D Mario game anymore. Like, anyone can make a regular 2D Mario game at this point. So that's what really inspired the Wonder Seeds. What's inspired the various level gimmicks, because it's like, well, we can't do the same thing with what we already have, so now we got to figure out new things to do. And they really gather as much out of the Wonder Seed concept as possible. They really twist that game around in some really interesting ways. But other than that, it's a 2D Mario game. There's not a whole lot to say about it. But I do have to say that I really found the controls to be very off, very odd in the beginning. And it's like, the game just didn't feel right. And I was kind of shocked. It's like, well, people are saying this game's a masterpiece, but it controls really bad. Are we really playing the same game here? And then I had an idea. I was actually in bed, and I thought about it. I'm like, man, the older 2D games felt so much better than this. Why? It can't be me being nostalgic, right? Why did old Mario feel so much better? And I'm like, wait a minute. I have those Super Nintendo Online controllers. I can pair them up to the Switch natively. What happens if and then I did that. I got out of bed, I went back to my Switch, and then I hooked up those controllers. And it worked, and it was great, and Mario felt so good. And I'm like, now this is more like it. This feels like 2D Mario. I knew I wasn't nostalgic. I just needed a Super Nintendo controller. So if you have that option available, if you have a good D-pad, it honestly helps the feeling of this game way more, dude. But other than that, I don't have too much to say about it. Really good game, though. Can we get a little prayer? Can we get a little confessional booth here, chat? Forgive me, gamer, for I have sinned. I enjoyed the Tales of Arise DLC more than Final Fantasy XVI. Let's go back to Final Fantasy XVI for a little bit. What's kind of odd about 16 is that when I was playing it, I kept thinking to myself, man, I'd kind of rather be playing Tales of Arise right now. Tales of Arise feels more closer to Final Fantasy as a series than Final Fantasy XVI did. So Tales of Arise, my game of the year from 2021. And it's not like it's the greatest game ever made or anything like that, but what I like about Tales of Arise is it just knows how to be a really fun action game. If there's nothing else it does better, it knows how to be a really good action game. Like, the combat feels good. The story itself, I would argue, is not very good, but the story presentation, the character models, the voice acting, the music, all that's good. Honestly, Tales of Arise is a case for good vibes trump everything. The game just feels cozy, dude. And I've been wanting to play Tales of Arise ever since Final Fantasy XVI, but it's like, I don't have the time to sink into that 60-hour RPG all over again. I'd rather play something new, But you know what? Then they announced DLC for the game, and this is the perfect opportunity to get the best of both worlds. New content for a game, but I don't have to play the whole game to get to that new content. Turns out, it is arguably not new content. It is recycled content. It is very recycled content. There is a new story and a new character at the center of it. And to be honest, if you've seen a fictional story before, you probably know where it's going from the start. So honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about it. But at the very least, it's action, it's side quests. It just feels good to play. It definitely gets very, very hectic. I honestly forgot maybe this game gets a little bit too hectic for its own good in terms of its battle system. Sometimes it's very easy to lose track of what's going on, but you know what? It's fun. That's all I need to say about it. It does kind of, if you want to play the DLC, just know that it does need a lot of time to get good, so to say. And to be honest, I'm not sure I expect most people to stick with it. But you know what? Just tackle it a little bit at a time, and you'll eventually get to a point where the story and the gameplay and all that is kind of intriguing. Well, the gameplay is always good, but the story eventually gets to a point where it's kind of intriguing. Again, is it different than what you are expecting the story probably is based off of your first few hours? Maybe not, but it's still reasonably fun for what it is. Get it on sale though, because it's not super exceptional. You can wait. Typecast is another probably didn't finish is the most appropriate for it, so I didn't put that much time into it. Not that you really need to. So what I would say is it's kind of a mix between something like Typing of the Dead and Vampire Survivors. And what I love about Typecast is it is the perfect balance between it looks simple enough that this game absolutely looks stupid easy. Why are people saying that it's so hard? I could beat this game super easy. People can't make it past the first loop, whatever that means. I'll get past the first loop easily. And then when you get into the actual game itself, suddenly you forget where every single key on the keyboard is. So yeah, I'm not very good at this game. I wasn't able to make it very far. They did recently add controller support, so you can play with an Xbox or PlayStation controller or something like that. To be honest, I actually find the game easier to play, and I can get farther with a controller than I can with a keyboard, but it just doesn't feel the same, you know? And also, I think the controller is nice, but I think you can only get so good with the controller as opposed to the keyboard. But other than that, honestly, really fun and very small game to play. So if you're looking for something a little bit bite-sized, a little bit something you can just pick up and play whenever you want, check out Typecast. It works out. All right, we're getting close to the end here. 3 more games to talk about. I'm losing my voice a little bit, so let's try to get through this as best we can. Vernal Edge is next, and Vernal Edge feels good, feels cozy. This is a nice and cozy game. So Vernal Edge is a Metroidvania game. You know, we've seen a lot of those throughout the years. What's funny is I've seen a lot of criticism towards this game that it's not really a Metroidvania though. There's like not a whole lot of exploration going on here. There's very little. You only like explore individual islands, not a whole interconnected world. So honestly, in that way, I'd say that Vernal Edge is a lot closer to something like Metroid Prime 3 Corruption rather than Super Metroid. Fortunately, as a Metroid Prime 3 enjoyer, I'm eating good here. So honestly, very enjoyable game. So what makes it so special is that because it's not quite as exploration focused, it's a lot more combat focused. And it feels a lot closer to something like character action like Devil May Cry or something like that, rather than like, I don't know, traditional Metroid, or even like a Zelda 2 or something like that. So there's a lot more you can do with like combo game and manipulating enemies and throwing enemies against each other and using the environment and your moveset to your advantage. There's a lot you can do here that makes it fun to play. I think its difficulty can be a little bit overtuned at times. Enemies can do a lot of damage to you, and to be honest, I don't always realize it, and I don't even remember the health beep that you're getting low on health ever happening all the time. So either enemies do so much damage that it bypasses that threshold, or I just wasn't paying enough attention. So honestly, sometimes the difficulty can be a bit overtuned, and it feels a little bit frustrating to play at points. But other than that, I think the game works really well. It's great. It's a great game. WarioWare Move It. Look guys, look, it is one of my greatest achievements. Wario Land Move It on the Nintendo Switch. Wahaha. For those who know, you know. So WarioWare Smooth Moves is my favorite WarioWare game. At least it was. It still is. It still is. Arguably. Love WarioWare Smooth Moves. That game also has a lot of style to it. That game's style is also the substance on that one. WarioWare Move It is obviously a follow-up to that idea. And what made Smooth Moves work so well is it's not just press a button to win the game. It's not just use the control stick to win the game. It is do a motion that will probably look ridiculous to maybe win the game, and you might fail because maybe the controllers aren't always as responsive as they should be for that. But you know what? The game is so much fun that you kind of ignore that, you kind of bypass that. And WarioWare Move It is that, but more. I did play Smooth Moves a little bit earlier this year, and I absolutely concurred that, yeah, I want to see where a new Wario game can take these concepts again in the future. And WarioWare Move It exactly delivered on that. Not necessarily more than that, though. Man, you know, something about this tier list, I feel like it's harder to place all of these games than it's been in previous years, but at the same time, the games have just been good that I played this year. I don't play bad games. What can I say? I don't play bad games, except Dragon Quest II. WarioWare Move It is absolutely exactly the game that it needed to be. I was a little bit underwhelmed. I wish it did a little bit more. I wish it was a little bit bigger, that there were more mini games in there. But at the same time, it delivered exactly what I wanted to, so I can't be that mad at it. And again, I wish its controls was a little bit more responsive. I think I would have enjoyed it more if the controls felt a little bit tighter, because unfortunately with motion controls, like, you can feel like you're doing the thing, and other people can be around you, and they can assure you you're doing the thing, but the game just isn't registering that at all. And it's a bit frustrating, but even despite that, the game is still fun to play. Okay, and we come to our last game on the list, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, which is, I guess, technically DLC. Who cares? It feels like a full game. So last year, with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I concluded that, you know, that was a good game, but it didn't hit me nearly as hard as the other Xenoblade games did. And Xenoblade is arguably one of my favorite franchises right now, so it felt really bad to say that one of the games was just good. Ultimately, it didn't feel like the game I wanted Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to be. So I was kind of looking forward to the expansion for that time, because Torn of the Golden Country really changed my mind on Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It made me appreciate that game way more, and I understood Xenoblade Chronicles 2 more after that game came out. So I thought that Future Redeemed was probably going to do the same thing, and the fact that it was a lot more... Its marketing implied that it was going to be a lot more fan service heavy, made it indicate to me that it was probably going to be more of the game that I wanted Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to be in the first place. And it feels kind of weird to say that I want a game to be more fan service heavy, which I don't know how I feel about saying that, but at the same time, I feel like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 kind of lacked the fan service, lacked the meaningful fan service, the tasteful fan service that I so craved. If you're gonna end a trilogy, you better end that trilogy, dude. Go all the way with it. All 3 games on the Nintendo Switch, someone who wants to get into Xenoblade can play Xenoblade 1 or 2. They're fine. They don't need to start with 3, dude. Go ahead with the fan service. Alienate them. I mean, that's not the sensible business move. Don't listen to me. But Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed ultimately did not change my mind on Xenoblade Chronicles 3 as a game. That said, it's a lot closer to where I wanted Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to be as a game. And I did feel that it more conclusively wrapped up the story that it was supposedly setting up to be. I guess spoilers for Xenoblade 3 and Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. Both of those games, both of those endings. But I was really dissatisfied with the way Xenoblade 3 ended, where it's like, these two worlds that were once one have come together. Oh, but they're in an infinite time loop that keeps going on and on and on, and when you break the time loop, both of the worlds separate again. And that was foreshadowed in a post-credits, a post-game optional side quest. Don't put that foreshadowing there, dude. Put it a little bit before. Make the characters have a little bit of a dilemma if they want to actually split up the worlds. Okay, enough ranting there. But the world split up, and it's like, okay, maybe the characters remember, and maybe one day they can somehow find a way to meet up again. They can finally truly conclude, or maybe not. Maybe they will always be separate from each other, and that's just how the game is going to end up. That's how the story ends, that's how it concludes, and that's how Xenoblade concludes. Maybe that's what they intended. And I didn't fully agree with that ending, but you know what? I guess I can kind of rationalize and expect it. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a prequel, so it doesn't go into anything that happens aftermath for Xenoblade 3. Except at the very end of the post-credits cutscene, when it goes through all the Xenoblade games, it shows cutscenes from Definitive Edition, and then 2, and then 3, and then at the very end of that, it realizes, oh, wait, hold on, and then it just smashes the worlds together again. So they're one world now, hooray! Congratulations, idiot, the series is concluded now, and maybe now Xenosaga follow-ups are gonna happen, who knows? I haven't played Xenosaga. Maybe we'll be talking about Xenosaga in this year's tier list when it eventually comes out. But anyway, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is about there. So there we go. That's the tier list, ladies and gentlemen. So it's been a few hours for me since I started this. It's probably going to be a lot less for you because I had a lot of dead air and taken a little bit of breaks here and there. So who knows? I hope you enjoyed listening to me. I hope that you enjoyed the background noise. I always love listening back to my opinions and how I felt about these games over the years. So I hope it was coherent. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a great time. And I will see you next year, if not in the next video. So, see you all then, guys.